Hey, how's it going, everybody? My name is SockBot, and today I want to talk about the Dualshock, because I have been getting so many comments, and this is literally the top comment I get, is how obnoxious the Dualshock is to work with within Dreams. And I disagree with that, and if you completely agree with that, and you're one of those people that commented, please feel free to debate any of this down below, but watch till the end of the video so I can at least get through all of it, and if I'm wrong, that's cool. I'm totally fine chatting about it, but I actually have been using the DualShock a lot. And I have two PlayStation moves, and I feel like a lot of these comments are coming from people that maybe don't have the PlayStation moves and haven't tried them, or maybe have both and, just aren't doing great with the DualShock and end up using the moves all the time and find it rather clunky to have to bust out those controllers every time they want to play this game. But I don't think that's the case, and I want to talk about it, and that's what this video is for. So if you like this kind of video, you're welcome to wait till the end in case you don't like the tips, but feel free to leave a like down below. Feel free to subscribe if you want to see more like this and or like the other things that I post. But yeah, let's get right into it. So I've decided to frame this video as a sort of tips video, being that I don't have a whole lot of difficulty necessarily using the DualShock 4 for most activities and all activities in general, even though I have some for very specific tasks. I do want to talk about this from my point of view, because my point of view is that the DualShock is good. It works well, and I have problems with it and solutions with it, and those solutions are basically what I'm going to talk about today that I think make it, feasible to use as a general creation tool. So to begin with, I want to start with a more general tip, and I'll get more specific with the controller and the different controls and shortcuts on it later. But for the first thing, I just want to say that one of the biggest things that you can do to improve your technique with the DualShock is to just use it more. So for example, if you have a Move controller, don't be spending your entire time switching back and forth between the DualShock and the Move controller just based on convenience or based on what you're working on. Instead, there are certain things like sculpting, like very detailed sculpting, that are just easier with the Move controls. That being said, I'm pretty sure that's the only one that I would consider totally easier with the Move controller. The rest can pretty much be debated, and in some cases maybe easier with the DualShock. But what I'm trying to suggest here is that if you do have a level where you're doing a bunch of different things, and you're creating certain sculptures, you're playing with logic, figure out which ones are most comfortable with which controllers and do all of that at once. Now, this has been a technique that I've talked about in the past where you work through your level piece by piece and then pull them together at the end. And it's definitely a good technique for level creation in general, but especially when you're using two different controller sets, which I know a lot of people are, it can get frustrating when you're switching back and forth between them because you get so used to the nuances of one and the shortcomings of the other. And I do think that there are shortcomings of both. For example, the Move controllers are incredibly great for sculpting, but for incredibly fine techniques or techniques where you want to move something in one specific direction, like let's say on the X or Y axis, and you want to maybe not use the precision tool because it's not quite apparent for this exact object that you're trying to move, the control sticks on the DualShock can be used for a lot of different forms of movement and rotation, but I'll get to that in a second. What I'm trying to say is split up your time with both of them. Make sure that you take a decent amount of practice, and definitely don't try to go between them incredibly frequently, because you're just going to frustrate yourself. Trust me, I have done that quite a lot. Now, similar to that, improving your basic techniques with certain things is important for getting used to the DualShock. But obviously, I'm not just going to sit here and expect that, you're going to go out there and practice for hours and hours and hours, which eventually you probably will do, but I get that initial turnoff from the controls, and so here's what I've learned to very quickly improve your skills quickly. For one, and I talk about this pretty consistently, use the nudge tool as much as possible. That's when you very slightly hold in on the R2 or L2, I'll get to that in a second, control, rather the triggers, and you just pull it down just ever so slightly, and this allows you to make big sweeping movements to just do tiny changes. If you've ever played in Photoshop, or honestly even Microsoft Paint, using the arrow keys, this is kind of that for Dreams, and it works incredibly well. In addition to that, make sure that you're using all of the guides like the surface snap and the tentacle snap and the grid and, every other one, frankly, because they all have their uses, mirror tool, those kinds of things. And more importantly, make sure you're using the technique that I see a lot of people doing, which I call stretch and stamp, or stamp and stretch, I suppose would be the correct order. And that is, don't try to use the DualShock to do crazy artistic curves by just smearing something across the screen. Generally, it's a bad technique for most things in Dreams, but especially with the Dualshock because it doesn't have the motion capabilities quite of the Move controllers. It is important that you spend your time stamping something down and modifying that using the controller, because the Dualshock is fantastic for modifying shapes that are already down. It's very easy to select things a little more specifically than even the Move controller sometimes. And so taking that stamp shape and stretching it in the different directions that you expect it to go is a great way to start with your more particular shapes, especially if you're trying to create something that looks more inorganic. Now, don't worry, I'm going to get to some more, advanced tips in a second, so if you feel free to skip forward if these are, too basic for you. But one of the biggest things that I relearned when using the Dualshock was the imp move camera, I think it's called. They mentioned it once in like the first tutorial that if you hold R1 while you're aiming at something, then you can instantly basically move your camera based on that object. It is great for repositioning your camera, something that the Dualshock is actually really, really good at, something that the Move controllers struggle at. But in addition to that, it's very, very easy to use this to solve one of the biggest issues with the Dualshock, which is getting between places quickly. You don't move as quick with the Dualshock as you do with the Move controllers. That's just how it is. But using this imp camera, I find myself easily able to jump between different sections with absolutely no difficulty at all. And basically what I mean by this is just hold R1 in an object in the distance and hold up to zoom towards it. It's something I talk about really early on in the tutorial, but I think a lot of people may have forgotten about it, and gosh knows I did, so there's my reminder to use that. But let's get into something a little bit more, I'm not going to say niche, but something that you may have not noticed. So like I said before with the stamp and stretch technique, one of the easiest things to do with the Dualshock to get something that, you want, to get a shape you want, to get a sculpt you want, is to place the objects down first and edit them after you place them. Now there are limitations to what you can do with this, but one of the best things that you can do for yourself in this respect is to place something down and then notice that when you hover over it with the Dualshock, with the imp obviously, you can then hold L2 to rotate it. And not only can you use the sticks to rotate it from this point, which is incredibly nice because a lot of people just hate these motion controls in general, and I get that, it takes a long time to get used to. But in addition to that, you can use the actual controller and the 6-axis, or I guess it's just a gyroscope now, to rotate that object yourself. And if you're having more issues with this, a good technique is to jump into the shape itself and make sure that you change the grab section of it. And this is within the shape tweak tools before you place it down. And you can change the section that it grabs and rotates off of, basically the axle that it rotates on, before you place it down. And this can make things a little bit easier, especially if you set that axle directly to the center of the object. So, next tip, again, we're getting a little bit more in depth here, is to carve using the stretch tool on negative shapes. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, like I said before, again, with the stamp and stretch technique, this is very similar, but it's for any sort of sculpt where you're trying to round out an edge or cut off a chunk. I find myself struggling with the Dualshock with using larger shapes to just kind of clip off that one section. And so when you use a smaller shape, the issue is, well, you basically indent that shape into the thing that you're trying to cut into, and it gets quite frustrating because then you try to fix that and you create more shapes and it just ends up looking completely messy. Now, obviously, you can blend that out with a more specific blend, whether it be hard or soft blend, but what I found more useful is to do that stamp and either pre or post stretch that shape out. So pre, you go into the settings for that shape before you place it down, the negative shape that is, by holding L1 and pressing square. From there, you can stretch the shape into a long cutting tool that can be quite useful. Or you can take that perfect cube and stamp it into the material that you want to cut away from, and then against that material, use the stretch tool to kind of stretch in either direction to kind of smooth out the sides. This is great if you're trying to kind of use a long rectangle but struggling with it to just chop off the side of something and try to make it look smooth as opposed to make it look like, you stuck a rectangle inside of it. Incredibly useful. I do this most of the time when I'm using the Dualshock. So moving on to depth. Now, this is just an issue in general with, 3D modeling. I don't think it's limited to Dreams, and I don't think it's limited to any 3D modeling things. It's tough to know depth when you're looking at a 2D image. It is 3D to us because, it looks like you can see into it, but it is a 2D image on a screen. So depth is tough no matter what you're doing. So what I would suggest doing is using the shape guide technique. Now this can work for the Move controller too, but again, these are techniques that will really improve your quality of life using the Dualshock. And so the shape guide technique is basically to place down a specific shape. Say you want to create a dome or a flat plane or something like that, and you're struggling to do that because even when you smear and you want to smear because you want that sort of organic shape, or that specific shape that you're trying to go for. And the issue is you're having trouble using the grid or using the precision tool, staying on the same plane. And so things are going all over. Things are perfect when you look at them, and then you turn the camera slightly and it looks like that straight line is now a big S bend that goes far further into the level than you want. So my suggestion is, if you're trying to create something flat, take a giant rectangle, stamp it down, and then get out of that sculpt, create your new sculpt, and use the, what is it called? Not the tentacle tool, the surface snap tool. Oh gosh, sorry, I've been talking for a while here. Use the surface snap tool and use whatever kind of brush you're trying to use, and kind of paint onto that as if it were a flat canvas. This is a really good way to create 2D levels in particular, because it stops you from, going too far in depth, and stops you from having to go back and edit everything to make sure it's all on the same plane, because using the snap tool, well, it's gonna all be on the same plane no matter what. Incredibly useful for 2D games, but also great for anything that you just want to be flat. And it's a really, really good way to create glass. If you are interested in this, I will definitely be making an individual quick tips on glass in general, but here's your preamble to that. And I will mention that the hint towards that glass model is you don't need to just use shapes with the surface snap, because paintings also work. Alright, not going to go any more in depth on that. Let's move on. So the final tip, and this is kind of where I get into the point where I'm sure a lot of you are still listening and thinking, okay, well, I do all of that and it's still frustrating to use, and I'm just sick of it, and I am this close to buckling down and buying 2 PlayStation Move controllers with the camera, and just dealing with that price so that I can play this game. And well, first I'm going to say, don't do that. Don't spend $100 to play this game, especially if you're still that frustrated with the DualShock. Unless, of course, you are, you're going to be super into this game for years down the road. Don't waste your money just yet. It is not a waste of money if you're going to play it, but I mean, just don't jump the gun. It's kind of like when you're an artist. Don't spend all of your money on tools before you really feel like it's a passion that you're going to spend a decent amount of time with. So my last tip, and maybe this is kind of an unfortunate one, but if you are still having trouble after all of this with the DualShock, make sure you're focusing on what the DualShock is good as. Now, I talked about this earlier in the video, but generally the controller, the DualShock that is very, very good for logic. It's very, very good for level design using other assets, and it's very, very good for very basic sculpting. If you're just trying to create something rather simple that's not super detailed, and you're not carving away at a shape trying to create a face or anything like that, the controller is actually really, really good with that. The DualShock, that is. I keep saying controller. I know they're both controllers, but the DualShock is really good at that because, like I said before, you can use the sticks. The sticks on the controller are incredibly precise and very, very useful, and they are even more finely useful than the Move controllers when you're trying to make the smallest of small tweaks. And that is what it's great at. Don't expect this DualShock goodness to work perfectly for everything else. It has a lot of the same technology that the Move controllers have in them. I mean, the Move controllers came before the DualShock, so you figured this new DualShock would have most of those, and it does. It has a gyroscope, just like they do. It's just the tracking isn't as perfect as the Move controllers. And trust me, the Move controllers are far from perfect. That being said, if you do find yourself really wanting to sculpt, if you really want to get into every single quickness and efficiency technique you possibly can do, yes, the Move controllers are fantastic. Just go on eBay and buy them. You can get a set of 2 Move controllers with the PlayStation camera. And by the way, for PlayStation 4, you do need the PlayStation camera that's used for VR. So that's a little expensive, but you can get those 3 things separate and used, and then just use a a mini USB, that's what it is, to charge both of them. And you can get all of that on eBay for less than $100. I got mine for $70. 2 Move controllers, and a camera. So if you are still struggling that much with the DualShock and you are so intent on saying that it is not the most efficient, and in some cases it's not, but it's not ever the most efficient place to find your controls. Great English, Gabe. Then go on eBay. It is really not that bad. Considering early access was $30, I don't think it's a bad investment. I just don't want people to jump into it right away, assuming that it's going to fix all of their problems. Because, as I have learned with my many hours with Create Mode so far, and literally just copying other things while trying to get used to all the controls, I can tell you, it is not just the controller. And I'm sorry it took me this long to say that, but that's kind of what I want to close on. Anyways, if you totally disagree with me, that's fine. This is just stuff that I have to suggest. Obviously, I do have Move controllers, so I have that option, and I don't quite know the frustration of doing it without, even though I did have them for the beta. I only had them for half the beta, and I mean, at that point, you could just say that I was still learning, and that's fair. But let me know what you guys think. If you are really, really struggling with this, and there are specific questions you have, feel free to ask them too. I might be able to answer some of them and hopefully relieve some of your issues with the difficulty that is sculpting with a DualShock. But like I said, it is all possible. I don't think Media Molecule lied at all. I don't think they exaggerated when saying it's all possible. I think it is. I think a lot of people are just still getting used to the controls in general, and that's why it's so frustrating and why a lot of people tend to blame the controller because, well, there are some things to blame, but, you know, it's a nice controller. Be nice to your controllers. They're better than you think they are. Anyways, my name is SockBot. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys have a fantastic day. And girls, I keep saying guys, I need to stop saying that, but unfortunately that's just how the English language works. Everything is male-centric. How devastating. Alright, have a great day, guys.